Hello, readers, friends, and everyone else out there. It's Aaron Vollner, and I am back with another episode of One Row Reviews. It has been a while. Oh, and my phone is about to die, so I'm going to plug it in so that it doesn't. There we go. Okay, it has been a while since I have done one of these, but I've been really missing doing them. I've been wanting to come back to it, so here we are. Now, I had to do a few catch-up rows in the interim, because it had been a while since I'd touched the blanket, but I figured out a system for doing some catch-up rows. Did the catch-up, realized after most of the way through the catch-up rows that I had accidentally grabbed a size smaller hook than I was using when I was working on the blanket previously. But I don't think anyone other than me would be able to tell looking at it up close, so it's not really a problem. Now, when I was doing these before, I had gotten a piece of feedback from somebody who had been watching the videos, and they said that they really wished that I was doing 2 rows instead of 1, because then I could go into more detail on the books, and they really wanted to hear more detail about the individual books that I was reading. So that's really good feedback, but I also really love the title One Row Reviews and the concept of I'm going to go for 1 row while I talk about this. So I said to myself, how do I bridge these 2 things? I said, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to list all the books that I've read for the past week, but I'm only going to go into detail on one of them so that I can hopefully go a little more in depth, as was suggested to me by this person, and we'll see how you guys like that. And if people don't like that, then I'll go back to doing it the other way. So first, however, we are going to talk a little bit about how writing went this week. Writing went quite well, actually. The 3rd Rock Rider book is still going more slowly than I would like, but the revisions are coming along. There's a chapter early in the book that has been just absolutely flummoxing me. I knew there were more things that needed fixed in it than I was seeing, and I was trying all kinds of different things to get myself to see what it was that needed fixed, and I finally figured it out this past week. In fact, I wrote about it in my email newsletter last week. I entitled it A Fantasy Author's Second Worst Nightmare, which, if you're curious what that is, it's a small detail I forgot from an earlier book. So there was a small detail that just completely escaped me during the drafting process, and then once I realized that I had forgotten to account for that, it was like, duh. Thankfully, this is not something that is going to majorly impact the direction of the plot, but it does have a pretty big impact on specifically how some scenes in the book play out, how they progress. So I am going to have to be careful as I go through remaining revisions and think about, okay, hold on, does this affect that scene that I'm working on now? So, big relief to have that figured out. It's been a lot of fun. One great thing about writing, and writing fantasy in particular, is even on the days when you struggle the most, it's still just a ton of fun to do, and that's why I keep doing it. So, let's switch over to talking about reading, shall we? So I have been reading 4 things this past week. In the car, I've been listening to the audiobook of Cornelia Funke's Inkspell. It's the 2nd book in the Inkheart trilogy. Oh no, there's 4 Inkheart books now. I forgot, she did a new one a couple years ago. So, the Inkheart series, I guess. On Libby, I have been listening to Jason Segel and Kristen Miller's Otherworld. In paper, I've been reading The Lost and Found Bookshop by Susan Wiggs, which is a historical fiction. And I have been reading The Stone of Farewell by Tad Williams, which is an epic fantasy, the sequel to The Dragonbone Chair, which I read earlier this year for one of my bingo squares. at the library where I work, we're doing book bingo. So each bingo square has like a different description for a type of book that you have to read in order to put a cover on that square, and you have to try and get bingo or blackout by the end of the year. So the Dragonbone Chair was my book for my Published the Year You Were Born square. It came out in 1988. And, you know, it's been a minute since I've read fantasy from that era. I like fantasy from that era. But I've been reading more recent stuff lately, and so hopping back into that era of fantasy is really interesting because you get to see some things that you probably wouldn't see or don't see very often with modern books in the genre. Best example in the Dragonbone Chair, he has this very slow-paced, almost meandering start to the book. It really, really takes its time with establishing the world and establishing the character, and it reads almost like a slice of life book for a long time before the inciting incident occurs and the plot really gets going and the adventure really gets underway. And I understand the market shifts for why you don't see that as much anymore, but I kind of miss it. It really gives you a chance to really get invested in the characters before you see them go off on the adventure. And I almost feel like it provides more room to go in depth on the characters a little bit. It's not a necessary thing to go in depth on the characters, but I feel like it is an avenue for getting there that we don't get to see as often as we used to, and it's kind of a shame. I would recommend this for, obviously, if you're a fan of classic 80s fantasy, definitely give it a try because that's precisely what it is classic 80s fantasy. If you miss the slower slice of life type intro to books, definitely give this a try. You will not be disappointed there. I have been hearing / seeing a lot of people this year who are talking about wanting to like reclaim their attention span or retrain their brain to like delayed gratification again, because technology, social media and stuff has kind of trained those things out of us. So if you are one of those fantasy readers who is trying to retrain your attention span or something like that, give this book a try. Or give this series a try, rather. Now, the second book does not have that same meandering quality to the opening, I think because the world and the characters are already well established at the beginning of Stone of Farewell through the first book. So, while I wouldn't call the opening of this second book fast-paced, it definitely gets into things more quickly than the first book did. But it's about the same length as the first book, so I'm going to be really interested to see how this one plays out. And with that... that right there is our last stitch for the week. So, here it is in all its glory. As always, at the end of One Row Reviews, we are going to lay this guy flat, and we're going to take our handy-dandy tape measure, and we're going to give this guy a quick measure. 21 inches as of right now. Thanks for listening. I'll see you guys next week.